The boy had been blind since birth. Yet, before sunset, he was staring at his father's face, while two transparent films trembled in the palm of a barefoot girl no one seemed to know. People at the market saw enough to stop moving, but not enough to understand whether they had witnessed medicine, danger, or something far beyond both. Why had the girl waited for that one child, and why did she vanish before anyone could even ask where she lived? The story began in Asheville, North Carolina, on a hot Saturday afternoon when the downtown farmers market was crowded with families, musicians, office workers, and vendors packing peaches into paper bags. Alder Whitcomb had brought his son, Ellis, there because his wife believed the boy needed ordinary sounds, ordinary air, and ordinary people, not another quiet afternoon inside their gated home on the north side of town. Alder owned a regional medical equipment company and had spent years flying Ellis to specialists from Atlanta to Boston, but every doctor had eventually told him the same careful truth. His son's eyes had conditions they could document, scan, and describe, but not repair. Ellis sat beneath a broad old tree near the edge of the market, wearing dark glasses and a white cotton suit his mother had chosen because she thought bright clothes made him easier to see in a crowd. The boy held his hands still on his knees and listened to everything around him. The paper rustle of produce bags, the scrape of folding tables, the uneven beat of a guitar, the distant laughter of children who did not have to count steps before moving. His father stood several yards away near a used book table, close enough to protect him but far enough to let him feel independent. Among the shoppers moved Briar, an 11-year-old girl with bare feet and a faded blue dress that looked as if it had been washed too many times in a group home laundry room. Some adults noticed her only long enough to move their purses closer or steer their children away. Briar did not beg, did not touch anything, and did not look lost. She studied faces as if she was searching for a shape she already knew by heart. When she saw Ellis, her steps slowed. She crossed the walkway without asking anyone for permission and sat at the far end of the bench. Ellis turned his head slightly, sensing someone near him, and the girl greeted him with a quiet steadiness that made him answer, before he could hide behind the guarded politeness he used with strangers. She asked why he was sitting alone. He explained, in the tired way of a child who had repeated the same fact too often, that he was blind even when surrounded by people. Briar did not respond with pity. She studied his covered eyes and told him, through gentle words rather than a promise, that not seeing did not mean he would always be alone. Ellis was used to adults speaking over him, around him, or about him, but this girl spoke to him as if he was the only person in the square. She asked his name, gave her own, and listened when he admitted that most people either looked sorry for him or looked away. Alder noticed the girl then. His posture changed first. His hand tightened around his phone, and his attention left the book table completely. He did not like strangers approaching Ellis, especially children who looked hungry, unsupervised, and impossible to place. His money had taught him to recognize risk in every unscheduled moment, and his fear for his son made him harsher than he realized. On the bench, Briar asked Ellis to take off his dark glasses so she could see his eyes. The request should have frightened him, yet something in her voice made him obey. When the glasses rested on his lap, the cloudy film over his gray-blue eyes was visible in the shifting market light. Briar leaned closer without flinching. She told him in her quiet way that she would not hurt him, and Ellis, who had known her for only minutes, chose to trust her. The first touch was so light that he barely felt her fingers. Then, deep inside his right eye, he sensed a movement that was not pain but release, as if something delicate had loosened after years of holding on. Briar drew back slowly, and between her fingers stretched a thin, nearly transparent membrane that caught the sun like mist. Several people nearby stopped talking. Ellis whispered that something had changed, but Briar was already turning toward the second eye with the same careful focus. When the second film came free, Ellis squeezed his eyes shut. For several seconds, he saw only brightness. Then the brightness softened into shapes. The first thing he made out was a shadow with dark hair leaning toward him. Then came the pale blur of her dress, the green-black outline of the tree, the moving figures beyond the bench. He could not see clearly, but he could see. Alder reached them just as Ellis began trying to describe the light. The father's fear struck faster than gratitude. He grabbed his son by the shoulder, demanded to know what the girl had done, and looked at Briar as if she had harmed the most precious person in his life. Ellis tried to make him understand that he could see outlines and faces, but the crowd gathering around them only made Alder more alarmed. Phones came out. A woman backed away and called it unnatural. Another person insisted it looked like a miracle. Briar stood with both shimmering films in her palm and kept her voice calm as she explained that she had only removed what blocked his sight. Alder did not hear her as help. He heard danger, confusion, and the collapse of every explanation he had paid doctors to give him. He pulled Ellis toward the black sedan parked by the curb. Ellis twisted back, trying to keep Briar in the blur of his new vision, while the girl stepped forward and tried to give Alder the films. The father did not turn around. The car door closed, the engine started, and the girl remained in the market with the strange membranes fluttering in her hand as the only proof left behind. Ellis pressed his face toward the car window as Alder drove through Asheville too fast for a man trying to stay calm. The boy named every shape he could recognize: trees, brick storefronts, passing buses, the orange smear of a traffic cone. Alder answered only when he had to, because every joyful word from his son made the same question hit harder. If the vision vanished before a doctor saw it, he would never forgive himself for leaving the girl behind without the films. Instead of going through the emergency room, Alder called the pediatric ophthalmologist, who had followed Ellis for years. Wealth opened the clinic after hours, but it did not make the exam less frightening. The doctor began with professional skepticism, then repeated the light test, checked the corneas, studied the retinas, and brought in another specialist from the hospital wing. Neither physician spoke for a long minute after the scans appeared on the monitor. Ellis could identify the white coat, the metal stool, the shape of his father's face, and the doctor's glasses. His vision was still adjusting, but the documented damage that had shaped his childhood no longer matched what the doctors saw. The older specialist finally admitted that the previous records had been real. The present findings were also real, and there was no medical pathway that could connect one to the other. Alder tried to force the situation back into language he understood. He asked whether a membrane could have been missed by imaging, whether some rare congenital material could have loosened, whether a child's fingers could remove anything from an eye without injury. The doctor did not mock him. He simply said that such a thing did not exist in normal practice, and that Ellis's eyes were now functioning in a way no one in the clinic could explain. Outside the clinic, dusk had settled over the parking lot. Ellis watched the lights come on one by one and asked his father whether the girl had been sent by God. Alder had spent his adult life trusting contracts, bank accounts, and lab reports, so he could not answer with certainty. He only knew that his son had entered the market blind and had left it seeing, and that the girl he had treated like a threat was now somewhere alone in the city. Guilt pushed him back toward the market. By the time they arrived, most vendors were folding tables, loading vans, and sweeping fruit leaves from the pavement. Alder moved from stall to stall, asking about the barefoot girl with the blue dress and dark curls. Some remembered seeing her before. No one knew her last name. No one knew where she slept. A woman closing a small flower booth finally gave them the first useful clue. Her name was Ruth Ann Holloway, and she had watched the girl come to the same bench for years. Briar, as the girl had once called herself, had accepted water but usually refused food, shoes, and money. She often sat for hours as if she was waiting for one person in a crowd of thousands. Ruth Ann had seen Briar leave after the commotion, walking away from downtown toward a hill where an old cemetery and unused chapel stood at the edge of town. The florist did not say it like gossip. She said it like a woman who had worried for a child and never known which authority would listen without making things worse. Alder took down the directions, but night had thickened, and Ellis was exhausted from the exam. They returned the next morning. Ellis insisted on sitting on the same bench first. The market was waking again, with coffee carts opening and vendors snapping tablecloths into place. A sudden gust rolled dry leaves around their feet, and something fine and bright landed across Ellis's shoe. When he picked it up, it looked like one thread from the same impossible films Briar had pulled from his eyes. Ruth Ann approached before Alder could decide what it meant. She had been thinking about the girl all night. Briar had once told her that she lived near the hill and that someone looked after her, though the florist had never seen any parent. After the miracle, Briar had said her work there was finished and had walked away with a calmness that now felt more troubling than comforting. Alder did not call the police yet, because he did not know how to explain a missing child he had no legal connection to, and a miracle no report would contain. That hesitation became his first serious mistake. Instead, he chose to search the hill himself with Ellis beside him, convinced that money, speed, and determination could still fix what his fear had damaged. Alder climbed the narrow path toward the old chapel, with one hand on Ellis's shoulder and the other wrapped around his phone. The grass was high around the cemetery stones, and the small white building at the top of the hill had peeling paint, a warped door, and a padlock that hung open from an old staple. Inside, dust lay on the floorboards, but someone had recently cleared a space near a plain wooden bench. Ellis found the first sign. On the bench rested two small wildflowers tied with a strip of blue fabric that matched the color of Briar's dress. Alder examined the room, expecting a blanket, a bag, any evidence that the girl had slept there. Instead, he found only a clean corner, a stub of pencil, and a folded paper tucked beneath a loose board. The paper held a child's drawing of a boy under a tree with light around his eyes. The discovery changed Alder's fear into something heavier. Briar had not stumbled upon Ellis by chance. She had carried some image of him before they met. Ellis, still learning how to use his sight, stared at the drawing until his eyes watered from effort. He told his father that the girl had known him before he knew her, and Alder could not answer without admitting that the same thought had crossed his own mind. At home, Melina Whitcomb listened to the account with a controlled expression. She worked as a corporate accountant, trusted records more than impressions, and believed the doctors must have missed something. She did not dismiss her son's sight, but she resisted the word miracle because it threatened the careful order of her life. Alder, who had once sounded much like her, found himself unable to return to that old certainty. Over the next weeks, Ellis's vision strengthened. He learned to read large print, then street signs, then the expressions peoples had once hidden from him. He saw the fatigue in his father's face, the loneliness of classmates who owned expensive shoes but had no real friends, and the quiet embarrassment of children who avoided the cafeteria line because their lunch accounts were low. Sight did not make him lighter. It made the world more complicated. Alder hired private investigators, contacted Asheville police, checked shelters, called county child welfare offices, and placed careful missing person inquiries without turning Briar into a public spectacle. Every effort collapsed into almost nothing. No one had a current address. No family came forward. The only fixed point was the bench at the market, where Alder and Ellis began bringing flowers on the same date each month. Half a year later, Alder was reviewing paperwork for a new nonprofit foundation he had created to help low-income children with vision care when his assistant told him that a woman from a former foster group home wanted to speak about a girl named Briar. The woman, Nadine Keller, had worked with children in Buncombe County for years. She could not hand over confidential files, but Briar had been listed as a missing foster child after running away from a group home on the edge of town. Nadine explained that Briar had been 8 when she first began saying she had to find a boy who had lost his light. Staff had believed she was using imagination to survive abandonment, grief, and the churn of foster placements. Then, one morning, she had left before breakfast and never returned. Searches had followed, but children whose disappeared strain systems were sometimes found only on paper, if they were found at all. Alder and Ellis went with Nadine to the old group home, where the director allowed them to see the shared room Briar had used. Above one narrow bed remained a drawing made in colored pencil. It showed a boy in a white suit sitting on a bench beneath a tree, while a barefoot girl reached toward his face. The director said Briar had drawn it months before she disappeared and had called it her future. In the nightstand was a small notebook. Its pages held short entries about waiting at the market, feeling that the right day was near, and believing she would know what to do when the boy arrived. The final entry was dated the morning of the miracle. Briar had written that she did not know how she would help him, only that she had woken certain the day had come. Ellis took the drawing with the director's permission, and Alder left the building changed in a way that no public apology could complete. He could not undo the moment when he had dragged his son away from the girl who saved him. He could only build something that treated children like Briar as worthy before they performed miracles for anyone. The foundation opened its first vision clinic that winter, and Alder named it for Briar Madden. 10 years later, Ellis was ladling soup into bowls at a community meal center funded by the Briar Madden Foundation when his hand froze over the serving counter. The young woman standing in front of him wore a thrifted dark jacket, had her curls tied back, and kept her eyes lowered as if she was used to being overlooked. Then she looked up, and Ellis recognized the same dark, steady eyes that had been the first human face he ever saw. The ladle slipped from his hand and struck the metal pan. Volunteers turned, but Ellis barely noticed them. He came around the counter slowly, as if one sudden movement might make her disappear again. Briar recognized him at the same time. Her face changed from guarded weariness to disbelief, then to the kind of relief that leaves a person unable to speak normally. They sat at a corner table, while the meal center continued around them. Briar explained through broken, careful sentences that she had run after the market because Alder's anger and the crowd's whispers had frightened her. She had believed someone might accuse her of hurting Ellis, force her back into foster care, or lock her away as a troubled child inventing impossible stories. Fear had made her leave the city before anyone could ask her name properly. She had lived in nearby towns, cleaned motel rooms, washed dishes, taken night classes when she could, and followed news about the boy whose sight she had returned. Years later, when she learned there was a foundation named after her, she avoided it at first because she thought it had to be a coincidence. Then curiosity drew her back to Asheville, and hunger brought her through the meal center door. Ellis called his father with a message so urgent that Alder arrived in less time than the drive should have taken. The man who entered the meal center was older, thinner at the temples, and no longer armored by the same cold confidence. When he saw Briar, he stopped, as if the past had taken physical form in front of him. Then he crossed the room and lowered himself to his knees before her. Not for show, but because he had promised Ellis that he would do it if she was ever found. He apologized through indirect, trembling words that made the entire room grow quiet. He acknowledged that she had saved his son, and that he had answered her mercy with suspicion. Briar knelt beside him and tried to lift him, telling him that a frightened parent might have reacted badly, but Alder refused to let fear excuse cruelty. He thanked her for Ellis, for the foundation, and for the life that had grown from the moment he had failed to honor. When they were seated, Alder asked what she had taken from Ellis's eyes. Briar did not offer a medical explanation. She said she had once been able to sense hidden pain in people, not like a diagnosis and not like sight, but as a pressure inside her own chest. When she saw Ellis, she understood that something over his eyes could be lifted. After that day, the ability disappeared. She had never again seen what was hidden in anyone. That confession did not make her seem less human to Ellis. It made the years she spent alone feel even more unfair. Alder asked where she lived and learned that she rented a room by the week and cleaned offices at night. He offered money, tuition, housing, anything that could repair the imbalance between what she had given and what she had endured. Briar refused to be treated as a shrine or a charity case. Ellis found the answer that Alder's guilt could not. The foundation needed people who understood hunger, shame, and the strange silence that surrounds children without steady homes. Briar could be hired, paid, trained, and respected as staff. Alder agreed immediately, but Briar insisted that she would work only if she earned her place without special favors. By the end of that afternoon, the most serious offer in her life was no longer help. It was a future with a desk, a paycheck, and a reason to stay. Briar arrived at the foundation office the following Monday with a borrowed blazer, a notebook, and the guarded posture of someone prepared to be underestimated. No one did. Alder had warned the staff that she was not a symbol to be stared at, and Ellis quietly made sure people learned her work before they learned the legend. Her first assignment was simple: sit with families waiting for eye exams and help them understand forms, costs, transportation, and fear. She was good at it in a way that could not be taught quickly. Children who refused to speak to nurses would answer her. Parents who felt ashamed about unpaid bills would let her help them apply for assistance. Teenagers who hated being pitied relaxed when she treated them like people with plans instead of cases. Within months, the foundation created a patient support role around the work she was already doing. Ellis was in medical school by then, training toward ophthalmology, because no other path had ever made sense to him. He split his time between classes, clinic rotations, and the foundation. Briar studied counseling at night through a community college program, then continued toward a degree while working full-time. Neither of them called their growing closeness romance at first. They used safer words like teamwork, friendship, and shared purpose. The truth became harder to avoid as the years moved. Ellis noticed that he looked for Briar first whenever he entered the clinic. Briar knew the sound of his step in the hallway before he appeared. She challenged him when wealth made him assume a problem could be solved with a check, and he steadied her when old survival habits made her refuse support she had already earned. Their work did not soften the differences between them. It forced those differences into the open and made both of them better. Alder saw it before either of them admitted it. Melina saw it too, though she remained quieter about matters of the heart than her husband. At a small foundation dinner, Briar corrected a donor who spoke carelessly about poor families, as if hardship came from laziness. The room went still, but Ellis watched her make the correction without anger, only with truth. Later that night, Alder told his son that love did not always arrive as comfort. Sometimes it arrived as the person who taught a family how to see the world without polishing it first. Ellis feared Briar would think his feelings came from gratitude. He also feared that saying nothing would turn his caution into another kind of dishonesty. The choice became unavoidable. After a young patient, a girl from a trailer park outside Black Mountain received glasses and cried because she could finally see her grandmother's face. Briar stepped into the hallway afterward and had to collect herself, and Ellis realized that the old miracle had not ended at the market. It had multiplied through every person Briar helped stand upright. During a walk beside the French Broad River, Ellis finally told her, in careful reported words rather than dramatic declarations, that she had become the most important person in his life. Briar did not answer with joy first. She answered with the old fear that they came from different worlds, and that people would reduce her to the poor girl. saved by the millionaire's son. Ellis said that he did not want to rescue her. He wanted to walk beside the woman who had already saved herself more times than he could count. Briar admitted that she had thought about him during every year away, not as a rich boy or a miracle, but as the child who had trusted her when no one else did. Still, she asked for time. She wanted her degree finished, her work secure, and her own name standing on something real before she let love become another place where she might disappear. Ellis accepted that condition because he understood that waiting for Briar was not rejection. It was the first safe boundary she had ever been able to draw. That night, Alder opened the old box where he kept Briar's childhood drawing, the thread from the market, and the first flower he had dried from the bench. He added a blank envelope beside them and wrote nothing on it. He knew the next decision had to belong to Briar and Ellis, not to guilt, not to gratitude, and not to the miracle that had once pulled them all together. Briar received her counseling license on a bright spring morning, and the foundation board approved her as Director of Family Support before the day was over. The vote mattered because it settled something she had carried for years. She no longer worked there because she was the girl from the bench. She worked there because families trusted her, staff relied on her, and children who had known shame could feel safe in her office. After the meeting, Ellis took her to the same market bench where they had met as children. The tree was older, the pavement had been repaired, and the market had grown, but Briar recognized the angle of the light. Ellis did not ask for a life built on repayment. He asked for a life built on the work they already shared, the truth they already protected, and the love that had waited until both of them could stand freely inside it. Briar accepted, not because he was the boy she had healed, but because he had become the man who never asked her to be smaller than her own story. Their wedding was small, and held in the old chapel on the hill, now repaired by volunteers from the foundation. There was no grand display, only family, close friends, former patients, and a few people who had once eaten at the meal center and now came dressed in their best clothes. Alder walked Briar down the aisle because she had no father to do it, and because over the years he had learned that fatherhood was not proved by control. It was proved by protection that did not erase the person being protected. Melina, who had once searched for any explanation except wonder, helped arrange the reception and kept the guest list practical. She never became a woman who spoke easily about miracles, but she became one who showed up early, balanced budgets for the foundation, and kept tissues in her purse for ceremonies she claimed would not make her cry. Her change was quieter than Alder's, yet just as real. Ellis completed his medical training and joined the foundation clinic as an ophthalmologist. He treated patients with science, records, scans, and surgical referrals when needed. He never pretended that every illness could be answered by faith. The mystery of his own eyes did not make him careless with medicine. It made him humble before what medicine could not explain. When families asked about his childhood, he told only enough to give courage, never enough to turn Briar into a spectacle. The full answer to the shock that had begun the story remained both simple and impossible. Briar had waited for 3 years because, as a child, she had sensed that a boy would come to the market with a darkness over his eyes that did not belong there. The films she removed were real enough to be seen by strangers, and delicate enough to leave no trace. Doctors could classify. Once Ellis could see, the strange gift left her. She spent the rest of her life with ordinary eyes, but not an ordinary heart. 2 years after the wedding, their daughter was born. They named her Hope because every other name felt too small for a child born from such a long road. On the anniversary of the day at the market, Briar and Ellis brought her to the bench with Alder and Melina. A small brass plaque had been placed there by the city after the foundation restored the surrounding space, describing it as the bench where one act of courage had opened many eyes. Alder, now past 70, held his granddaughter and watched her reach toward the sunlight coming through the leaves. He did not speak like a man trying to own the miracle anymore. He stood like a man who had finally understood that the greatest gift in his life had first arrived as someone he almost pushed away. Briar sat beside Ellis, her shoes placed neatly under the bench for a moment, her bare feet touching the warm pavement as she let the memory return without fear. Hope reached for her mother's hand, then for her father's face, and Ellis closed his eyes while the child traced the features he had once never expected to see. Briar watched them with a stillness that belonged to both the girl she had been and the woman she had become. Around them, the market moved on with peaches, coffee, music, and ordinary people passing through ordinary light, unaware that a family on one bench was quietly holding the proof that being seen can change more than the eyes.